Well, you're watching Book TV on C-SPAN 2. We are at FreedomFest in Las Vegas interviewing some authors, and we want to introduce you to the author of this book, Latterday Liberty, A Gospel Approach to Government and Politics. Connor Boyack is the author. Mr. Boyack, what is the premise of your book?
The basic argument is that Mormons should be libertarians, and it's not something you see with a Mitt Romney or a Reid, that we have very prominent Mormons who are entrenched in conservatism or liberalism. My argument is that the doctrines of our faith, the scriptures that we have, the teachings that we embrace, really support a more libertarian framework, a political framework. And of course, I have to contextualize that. Many people, especially in our faith, think that libertarians are more, marijuana smoking, atheists. They have this conception of what a libertarian is. And so I distill down what liberty is, what a libertarian is, someone who embraces that liberty. And then I provide a bunch of resources to suggest why our Mormon faith supports a liberty point of view.
Well, first of all, where did the term Mormon come from?
Mormon is named after a prophet named Mormon. It's the Book of Mormon is another one of our books of faith, another set of scriptures apart from the Bible that we have. Mormon was the prophet who kind of compiled the record, and so it's a nickname that's used. The church's name is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We primarily call ourselves Latter-day Saints, but colloquially we're known as Mormons. So,
now, Mr. Boyack, Mormons are overwhelmingly Republican. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely.
Today? Has that always been the case?
It hasn't. It's actually an interesting history. So in the first chapter of the book, I talk about how the parties have somewhat flip-flopped. The Republican Party was formed, among other reasons, to extinguish polygamy, which was quite prevalent among the Latter-day Saint population in early Utah. And so the Democrat Party was quite favorable to Mormons at the time, and people thought at the time in the LDS Church and the Mormon Church that you couldn't be a good Republican and a good Mormon. That was kind of the prevalent thought, whereas now it's reversed. Now the thinking is that, well, Reid can't be a good Mormon, he's a Democrat and he supports abortion and these welfare policies. So it's quite flipped, and what I try to do in the book is say, let's not talk about parties. Parties come and go and their platforms can change. I'm more interested in the underlying principles, and so that's why I think I can peg it closer to libertarianism, whereas many people think in terms of Democrat or Republican or even conservatism and liberalism.
You write in Latter-day Liberty that Latter-day Saints have been instructed by numerous church leaders to promote wise laws and sound policies. Doing so requires discarding the false left-right political paradigm and approaching public policy from a principled perspective on every issue.
Yeah. I think a lot of times left and right are synonymous. We think that there is this dichotomy between conservatives and liberals. When I see them both as interventionists, as I say in the book, in their varying areas of interest, they support the government using coercion to force people to do things. When a basic element of our faith is this principle of moral agency, we should be free and unrestrained to choose what we want to do, to be held accountable for those things. And so coercion is really repugnant to the persuasion that instead should be used to try and get people to do the right thing. And so I don't see it as being between left and right. I see it as between persuasion and force. And so that's why I try and boil it down to the libertarian position is based upon persuasion, whereas force is used by both parties, by conservatism and liberalism, to support their varying areas of interest.
So let's take Reid and Mitt Romney, who you've mentioned as examples. Does Reid's politics make him a bad Mormon, a good Mormon, or doesn't it matter?
It depends who you ask and probably the issues that you ask. Certainly I find some of his issues objectionable, as I do Mitt Romney. For example, Reid may be on his social welfare policies or his position on abortion, things that I find in conflict with the principles of our faith. I don't necessarily equate that to mean that he's a bad Mormon. Certainly plenty of Mormons have differing applications of these underlying principles. My aim with the book is to try and bring those principles more to the surface and suggest more consistent application of them to public policy. So the discussion, I don't think, should be, is he a good Mormon? Because if you try and say, well, if you're not correctly applying these principles to politics, that can apply to, I think, conservatives, liberals, everything in between, where there's just an inconsistency, in my view, between here's what we claim to believe and here's how it's being misapplied. So I think the same issue, for example, with Mitt Romney on warfare. I find his position on warfare to be quite repugnant to the principles of our faith. I don't think that means he's a bad Mormon. I simply think that he's inconsistent in applying the principles that we both claim to believe in to his position on something like war.
What can we learn about Mitt Romney as a potential president in your book?
Yeah, it's a good question with the election coming up. By no means is this a Mitt Romney book. It's not about people, it's not about parties, but many people have asked the question, and I think it's a fair one. I think what can be learned is, what does Mitt Romney's faith represent? Many people see Mitt Romney as the public reflection of what a Mormon is and should be, this kind of 1950s era clean-cut businessman. And taking away that veneer and pulling it down to the principles, I think this book can suggest to people what a Mormon, in my view at least, should believe when it comes to politics. I think they'll see the dichotomy between what I argue for and what Mitt Romney is now advocating on the campaign trail. But certainly, whether the question is about Mitt Romney or Harry Reid or any number of other Mormon people in positions of prominence in politics, it helps them understand what our doctrines are and how they might suggest an alternative course in politics.
Well, one of the underlying themes of your book is the separation of church and state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an important thing. It's a phrase that's used by many people, and I think misunderstood. Certainly we don't want the state intervening in issues of church, into religions. I think we definitely need church to be an influence in state. Many people have this apoplectic fit when any type of pulpit pounding occurs and church leaders are speaking out against a candidate or an issue. Many people got upset when our church was involved in Proposition 8 in California, for example. I see these as perfectly legitimate. I think we need religious influence in politics. So that really is a basic premise of my book, is suggesting here are religious principles based on freedom, based on choice, based on independence. These are things I think we need to see more of in our political conversation and not less.
Where do you live?
I live in Utah.
And what do you do there?
I'm a web developer by trade. Recently I started a libertarian think tank, Libertas Institute, trying to spread the message of liberty at a state level there in Utah.
And what is the 10th Amendment Center?
10th Amendment Center is an organization with which I was recently affiliated for a couple of years. I was the director of the Utah chapter. It's a great national organization, the intent of which is to help state legislators push back against the federal government along constitutional lines. So, for example, with Obamacare, even though the Supreme Court upholds Obamacare and claims that it's constitutional, the 10th Amendment Center position on that would be nowhere under the Constitution's express limited delegated powers was the federal government given the authority over health care and issues of that relate to that. Therefore, we as the states need to fight back. And so it's a principle that I support and have been very much involved in Utah.
Connor Boyack, if people read Latter-day Liberty, what will they learn about the Church of Latter-day Saints?
They will learn some of the essential doctrines upon which our faith are based. I mentioned moral agency, for example. We believe in modern living prophets. We believe that revelation continues to come from God and can direct the affairs of our individual lives and even public policy. We believe that God speaks to man. We believe that the things that he says should be applied to the public sphere at large, and whether that's myself as an insignificant person teaching those issues, or someone in a position of leadership being able to apply those issues. We think that is of extreme importance, and that's why I've offered this book to the public.
Who is Marion Romney?
Who is Marion Romney? Marion G. Romney was a member of church leadership, very high ranking. I forget the relation to Mitt Romney. I think he was a great uncle or something of that effect. He was an ardent opponent of socialism. Back in the day when the conversation was more, communism and socialism, Ezra Taft Benson was another familiar name to many who carried the same tune. But the Romney name certainly is going to catch people's eye, I think. I do talk about Marion G. Romney there. He was very outspoken in his views of the importance of individualism, of taking care of one another, the basic principles upon which liberty are based. And so he's one of many church leaders who I've included in the book that have talked about this. My intent is to compile those statements and the scriptures and make a single case for liberty.
Who was Brigham Young?
Brigham Young was the prophet of our church after the founder Joseph Smith, the founding prophet. He was directly involved in leading the Latter-day Saints westward in their migration towards what is now Utah. After they were basically expelled from their homes and forced out, they migrated westward. He was a colonizer. He was a great leader for a long time of the church. He built many temples there in Utah, and he was the governor of the territorial area of Utah. So he was